Surprise! It's officially ours!
Every rooms, every door, all of it.
She has no idea whose name is actually on it.
The day I found out my best friend was sleeping with my husband, I was standing in the kitchen, holding the exact key she used to let herself into a house I paid the down payment on. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just looked at that little brass key catching the light from the window over the sink, and I thought, she doesn't even know what she's holding. Stories like this don't just happen. They're built, quietly, over years. One signature, one shared account, one late-night conversation you don't think matters until it does. This one was built by me, without even realizing it, and it was about to become the reason my best friend's entire world came apart. My name is Renata Okafor. I'm 34, and for 11 years, my best friend was a woman named Simone Ad. We met in nursing school in Houston, back when we were both broke, both exhausted, both surviving on vending machine coffee and each other. Simone was the friend who showed up at 2 a.m. when my car broke down on I-45. I was the one who sat in the waiting room when her mother had her second stroke. We built our lives side by side, mine with Marcus, hers with a string of men who never stayed. She used to joke that I'd gotten the last good one, and she'd just have to keep borrowing my life for inspiration. I didn't know how literally she meant that. Marcus and I got married 8 years ago, in a backyard ceremony with string lights and his grandmother's old hymnal. He is, a contractor, sharp with numbers, the kind of man who reads the fine print on everything except, it turned out, his own marriage. I was the practical one. I'm a claims adjuster. Reading contracts and finding the details other people miss is literally my job. So when we bought our first house 4 years ago, I did what I always do. I made sure my name was on the deed, on the mortgage, on the insurance. Not because I didn't trust Marcus, because I'd seen too many women in my line of work lose everything in a divorce simply because they never checked whose name was where. When Marcus started his own contracting company 2 years ago, I was the one who helped him structure it. I didn't do it for control. I did it because I loved him, and because I'm the kind of person who reads page 14 of a document nobody else bothers to open. My name went on the LLC as a co-owner. My name went on the equipment loans as guarantor, because my credit was better. My name went on the truck titles, the tool insurance, even the small storage unit where he kept his overflow inventory. I never once imagined I'd need any of that information for anything other than tax season. The unraveling started small, the way these things always do. Marcus started working later. Not dramatically later, just enough that I noticed, but not enough to accuse. Simone started canceling our Sunday brunches, always with a reasonable excuse. A shift change, a sick dog, a girl thing she didn't want to talk about. I want to be honest about something, I noticed, and I didn't want to see it. There's a particular kind of denial that lives in women who've built a life around trusting the people closest to them. I told myself Marcus was stressed about a new commercial contract. I told myself Simone was going through something with her mother's care again. I made excuses for both of them, because the alternative, that the two people I loved most were choosing each other over me, was too large a thing to hold. The first real crack came on a Tuesday in March. I'd left my phone charging on the kitchen counter and picked up Marcus's by mistake when it buzzed. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that, because I know how this sounds. I glanced down out of habit, the way you do with a notification banner, and saw a text preview that didn't make sense at first. She still doesn't know. I hate this. The name above it was saved as Home Depot, Danny. Not Simone, Danny. A name Marcus had used before for a supplier he didn't want me asking about, back when he was planning my 40th birthday 2 years early and hiding the receipts. I told myself it was innocent. I told myself a lot of things that spring. The truth revealed itself in pieces, the way water finds cracks in a foundation you didn't know were there. A hotel charge on the business card, the one I could see because I was the guarantor and got the statements. A team lunch he mentioned, that Simone, when I asked her directly over the phone, described in a completely different location. A perfume on his jacket that wasn't mine, and wasn't his sister's, who'd hugged him at Easter, and who I'd initially blamed for the scent. I am not a woman who explodes. I am a woman who documents. It's the claims adjuster in me. When something doesn't add up, you don't confront, you collect. So I did what I do for a living. I built a file. Quietly, patiently. Dates, charges, Screenshots I told myself I'd delete if I was wrong. I wasn't wrong. The confirmation came on a Thursday, the kind of gray Houston afternoon, where the humidity sits on your skin like a second shirt. I was supposed to be at a claims conference in Dallas, a 2-day trip Marcus knew about for a month. My flight got canceled, mechanical delay, they said, and instead of booking the replacement flight through the airline app on my phone in the terminal like a stranger, I drove home instead, 3 hours down I-45, because something in my gut told me to. I didn't walk in on a scene from a movie. It was quieter than that, and somehow worse. Simone's car was in my driveway, parked at an angle, like she hadn't planned on staying long. Through the front window, I could see her sitting on my couch, in my living room, laughing at something on her phone, comfortable in a way that told me this wasn't the first time. Marcus came out of the kitchen with 2 glasses of wine, the good bottle, the one we'd been saving, and handed her one like it was Tuesday. I sat in my car at the curb for 11 minutes. I know, because I watched the clock the entire time, needing something solid to hold on to. And in those 11 minutes, something in me went very still and very clear. Not the calm of shock, the calm of a decision being made. I didn't go inside. Instead, I called my attorney, a woman named Priya Chandrasekaran, who'd handled a property dispute for me 2 years earlier, and who I trusted the way you trust someone who has already seen you at your least composed. It was after 6, but she picked up on the second ring, because that's the kind of relationship we'd built. I need you to tell me something, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. If everything is in both our names, the house, the business, the equipment, all of it, what happens to a man who tries to walk away from his marriage and take half of it with someone else? There was a pause on the line, the particular pause of a professional recalculating a situation. Depends, Priya said carefully. What exactly is in both your names? All of it, I said. Every piece of paper he's ever signed for 4 years, I signed too. Or my name's on it, as guarantor. Or I'm listed as co-owner. Another pause. Then, quieter. Renata, does he know that? That was the question that stopped me cold, sitting in my car outside my own house, watching my husband refill my best friend's wine glass. Through a window I'd picked out the curtains for myself. Did Marcus know? Did Simone? I thought about every document I'd ever organized in that filing cabinet in our home office, a cabinet Simone had complimented once, joking about how annoyingly organized I was. I thought about the LLC paperwork, the equipment loans, the truck titles, the storage unit lease, even the joint business checking account that required 2 signatures for anything over $5,000. I thought about the fact that if Marcus was planning to leave, to build some new life with Simone using the company he thought was his, he was about to find out that nothing he owned was entirely his to take. And Simone, who'd cried in my kitchen after her divorce from her first husband, who'd told me, wine-drunk and honest, that she never wanted to be the kind of woman who ended up with nothing because she didn't ask the right questions. Simone had spent 11 years watching me build a life with careful, deliberate precision, and she still hadn't thought to ask whose name was actually on the house she was sitting in. She doesn't know, I said slowly, mostly to myself. She has no idea what she's stepping into. Renata, Priya said, and I could hear her sitting up straighter on the other end of the line, could hear the shift from friend to attorney. Before you do anything, before you walk in that door, I need you to tell me exactly what you want out of this. Because what you're describing isn't heartbreak anymore. It's leverage, and leverage only works if you're patient enough to use it right. I looked back at the window one more time. Marcus was laughing now, his hand resting on the small of Simone's back, the way it used to rest on mine. Simone had her head tipped back, comfortable, at home, in a place she believed she was about to inherit. She had absolutely no idea that the woman she'd betrayed was sitting 11 minutes away, holding every piece of paper that made that house, that business, and that entire imagined future, legally, financially, hers. I want to be patient, I told Priya. I want to watch exactly how far they're planning to go before they find out they built their whole future on my name. I put the car in reverse and drove away without either of them ever knowing I'd been there at all. What I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't find out until 3 weeks later, sitting across from Priya with a folder full of documents Marcus didn't remember signing, was that Simone wasn't just sleeping with my husband. She was already planning to move into a house that, on paper, had never belonged to him at all. I didn't confront anyone for 3 weeks. I want you to understand what that actually took, Because patience like that isn't coldness, it's discipline. Every night I went home to the same house, cooked the same dinners, slept 18 inches away from a man who was planning a life without me. And every night, after he fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a folder of documents and a legal pad, building something far more precise than rage. Priya had been right. What I was sitting on wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was leverage. And leverage only works if you understand it completely before you use it. Here is what 3 weeks of quiet, methodical work revealed. The house, the one Simone had been sitting in that Thursday evening, drinking our good wine, was titled in both our names, but the mortgage refinance we'd done 18 months earlier had, at my insistence, moved to a loan structure where I was the primary borrower. Marcus's credit had taken a hit from a business expense the year before, and I'd stepped in to keep our rate low. He'd been relieved at the time. He'd thanked me, actually, sitting at this same kitchen table, and told me I'd saved us thousands of dollars a year. He had no idea he'd also signed away his standing as the primary owner of record. The contracting business, Okafor and Reyes Construction, the company Marcus had built his identity around for 2 years, was structured as an LLC with 2 members. Me, at 49%, and him, at 51%. It looked, on paper, like his company. But 2 years earlier, when we'd taken out the first major equipment loan to buy a used excavator and a flatbed trailer, the bank required a personal guarantor with stronger credit. That guarantor was me. Every major piece of equipment the company owned, 3 trucks, a trailer, an excavator, a full set of commercial tools insured under a business policy, was collateralized against loans that had my signature and my credit behind them, not his. The storage unit where he kept overflow inventory and, I now knew, occasional overnight bags for a woman who wasn't his wife, that lease was in my name too, because I'd signed it the day we needed it, standing in an office while he was on a job site. Marcus wasn't planning to leave me and start a new life. He was planning to leave me and keep the old one, believing it was entirely his, while replacing me inside it with someone else. And Simone, my best friend, a woman who'd once told me over wine that she'd never again let herself be financially blindsided by a man, was preparing to move into a life built entirely on my signatures, without asking a single question about whose name was actually on any of it. I let it happen for 3 more weeks, because I needed to see exactly how far the plan went before I moved. What I learned in those weeks changed something in me. I learned Marcus had been talking to a real estate agent about listing our house, the house I owned as primary borrower, with the intention of splitting the proceeds and using his half as a down payment on a place with Simone. I learned he'd asked his lawyer friend, informally, over beers, what a clean divorce might look like, assuming, because he'd never once read our LLC operating agreement in detail, that the business was fundamentally his. And I learned something about Simone that hurt in a way I hadn't expected. She wasn't a stranger who'd stumbled into my marriage. She'd been planning her own future around this too. I found a text. Marcus, careless with his own phone by then, comfortable in a life he thought was already decided, where Simone had asked whether the business stuff would be finalized before or after they told me, whether she'd get to keep her name off any paperwork that made this messier than it needed to be. She wasn't blind to the marriage she was breaking. She was calculating around it, the same way I was calculating around her. 2 people who loved me had spent months quietly building a future that required my signature to exist, and neither of them had thought to check whether that signature could be withdrawn. The day I acted, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw anything. I scheduled a meeting. I told Marcus I wanted to sit down with Priya to restructure some of the business paperwork for tax purposes. True, in its way, if incomplete. He agreed without suspicion, because in 4 years of marriage, I had never once given him a reason to expect anything from me but competence and calm. That was, I realized later, exactly how I'd built the life he thought he could quietly walk away from. I was the person who handled things. He'd simply never imagined I might handle him. We sat in Priya's office on a Tuesday morning. Marcus, in his work boots, still smelling faintly of sawdust, checking his phone once under the table in a way that told me he had somewhere else he'd rather be. I let him get comfortable before I spoke. I know about Simone, I said. No preamble, no tears, just the fact, laid on the table between us like a closing document. I watched something in his face try to organize a defense and fail, because the specifics I laid out next weren't accusations he could argue with. They were dates, hotel charges, a storage unit access log Priya had pulled that showed exactly which nights he'd used his key. There is no plausible deniability against documentation. Renata, he started, and I held up a hand, not out of anger, but because we weren't there for his explanation. We were there for the part he hadn't seen coming. Here's what I actually need to talk to you about, I said. The house, the business, the equipment, the storage unit. I need you to understand, before this goes any further, exactly whose name is on all of it. I watched him listen, really listen, for the first time in months, as Priya laid it out with the same clean precision I'd used to build our life. The mortgage, primary borrower, me. The LLC, controlling member with tie-breaking authority, written into the operating agreement he'd signed without reading closely 2 years earlier, me. The equipment loans, sole guarantor, me. The storage unit, me. You can leave, I told him, and I meant it as fact, not threat. You can go build whatever life you want with her. But you're not taking the truck. You're not taking the excavator. You're not taking the company name, because I have controlling interest, and I will vote to dissolve it and reform it under a new entity before I let you run it with someone else. And you're certainly not taking a house you don't hold primary title to. I want to be honest about something here, because this is the part of the story that matters more than the anger. I didn't do any of this to destroy him. I did it because for 4 years, I had been the quiet architecture holding up a life 2 other people assumed they were entitled to walk into. Simone assumed loyalty meant she'd never have to think about consequences. Marcus assumed love meant I'd never use what I knew. Both of them were wrong, and both of them found that out in the same conference room, 12 minutes apart, because I'd asked Simone to come in separately that same afternoon to discuss the storage unit lease she didn't know was mine to terminate. She walked in smiling. She left in silence. I told her, calmly, the way you'd tell anyone finalizing paperwork, that the space she'd been using to store the boxes she'd already started packing for a life with my husband was leased under my name, and that her access would end that Friday. I told her I hoped whatever she and Marcus built together was built on something more solid than borrowed foundations, because everything she thought she was walking into had my signature holding it up, and my signature was coming off all of it. She didn't apologize. I hadn't expected her to. Some people, when caught, reach for shame. Others reach for justification. Simone reached for the second, telling me love doesn't ask permission, that some things simply happen. I told her, love might not ask permission, but mortgages do, and business licenses do, and every single asset she thought she was inheriting required a signature she'd never once considered might not be his to give. The divorce took 11 months. Marcus kept his tools, his truck, the one truck not under the equipment loan, and very little else. The company was dissolved, and I started a smaller version of it myself, hiring 2 of his former crew members who told me, quietly, they'd rather work for someone who did what she said she'd do. The house sold. I kept 60% of the proceeds, per the loan structure Priya had built around the original agreement, and I bought a smaller place in my name only. No exceptions, no shared signatures, no room for anyone to mistake ownership for permission. Marcus and Simone stayed together for about 7 months after the divorce finalized. I heard, secondhand, the way you hear these things, that the relationship didn't survive the reality of starting over with nothing solid beneath it. No house, no business, no equipment, no easy comfort. Betrayal is easy when it's borrowed. It gets much harder when you have to build the thing you stole from scratch, together, with someone who resents needing your help to do it. I don't know if Simone ever understood what she actually lost that day in Priya's office. I don't think it was me. We hadn't been close in months by then. Not really. Not since the lies started. I think what she lost was the version of herself who believed she could take something without ever having to answer for how it was built. Sometimes betrayal doesn't destroy you. Sometimes it simply reveals, with brutal clarity, who was actually holding everything together the entire time. I think about that Thursday evening often, sitting in my car for 11 minutes, watching 2 people I loved be comfortable in a life they hadn't built. I think about how close I came to walking in and screaming, to giving them the scene they might have expected, the kind that gets you sympathy but costs you everything else. I'm grateful, now, that some quieter part of me knew that the strongest response to being underestimated isn't noise. It's patience, and a folder full of paperwork nobody thought to read. If this story made you think differently about the things you build quietly, in the background, while other people take them for granted? Let me know. I'd love to hear which part hit you the hardest.